Oh God, it's so small, but it was my world. Never enough daylight to play, in a town where imagination ran wild. Why did we all move away? Chapter 1. Oh God, it's so small, but it was my world. I am proud to be born a wheat farmer's son. I came into the world on the 1st of November 1945 in Kerrang, about 280 kilometres northwest of Melbourne in Victoria. I popped out in Kerrang District Hospital, stayed for 2 days and returned home, 26 gravelly miles down the road. So I have to put Kerrang on my passport, which irritates me because before that, my mum carried me around in her stomach for 9 months in a great little Mallee town called Quambatook. My heart still warms at the sound of the name, Quambatook, resting place beside a river. That's what I'd like on a passport. I don't know what Aboriginal language it comes from, but the name is perfect. The locals affectionately call it Quambi. There used to be a Nininook and a Chinkapuk nearby. My mother, Shirley Ellen Manuel, and my father, Keith Williamson, were an obvious match. They both grew up on the land and in the same district in the Mallee. But even though their farmhouses were only 64 kilometres apart, the farms were completely different. Dad lived on Canny Ridge, pure sandy loam, wheat country in the Mallee scrub. Mum came from the eastern side of the forest on an irrigation farm. Her dad bred fat lambs on the grey soil around Kerrang. On Mum's side of the forest, there are no mallee trees. West of the swamp, the mallee trees exist all the way to Western Australia. Heading towards Kerrang from Quambatook, you come to the western edge of the Wandella forest of swamp box trees. This marks the boundary of the Mallee scrub. It always fascinates me how the Mallee red soil stops on a fence line about 10 kilometres out of Kerrang. Mum was like new stock in the Mallee district. She loved singing and so did Dad. Dad's brother played the violin and Mum's brother played the ukulele. In fact, my first ukulele belonged to my Uncle Rolly. Like most Mallee district towns, Quambatook was completely dominated by the tall concrete silos built during the First World War. The little town really only exists because of farming. Dad and his brother Arthur jointly owned blocks of land north and south of Quambi. The blocks north were roughly 16 kilometres away and totalled about 3,000 acres. They were called Canny Ridge, where Dad grew up with Arthur and 2 sisters, Templetons and Mars Hill. The other blocks were named after their original owners. We also had Knights Lake and land around the cemetery south of the town, so it made sense for both Williamson families to live in Quambi. We were constantly driving tractors and machinery back and forth through the town to work different paddocks. Uncle Arthur had a workshop and shed, and so did Dad. Uncle Arthur managed the sheep and Dad managed the wheat farming. Being the firstborn, I pretty much had things my own way for a few years. My brother Willie turned up 3 years after I was born. We shared a bedroom. Robin arrived next and eventually shared my single bed, which meant I would often lie in his warm piss. Then Peter arrived and he shared Will's bed. Jeff came along much later. Will, Pete and I were born on the 29th and 30th of October and 1st November respectively, just under 9 months after Dad's birthday. That's a fact us boys have chuckled about over the years. We were no better or worse off than most kids in Quambi. I didn't complain about sharing a room as I didn't know or expect any better at the time. I often wondered why Mum kept a double room at the front of the house for guests. It was hardly ever used. If a mate from a farm came to stay, he had a better bed to sleep in than I did. I'll never forget some things from the early days in Quambi. One terrible morning, Mum tripped over baby Will, who was crawling on the floor. She spilt a fresh pot of tea all over my arm and back. I was about 4 years old. The neighbours came running to Mum's assistance, but despite all the attention, no one seemed to know what to do. Back in those days, people didn't know that the best thing would have been to put me under a cold shower. Dad pulled off my singlet, skin and all, and wrapped me in a blanket. The nearest hospital was in Kerrang. It was very traumatic, turning over and over on the bench seat of the old army Chev ute, shivering as we sped along the gravel road. I kept saying to Mum, "Why did you do it?" I still count my lucky stars the hot water didn't land on my face. It probably would have looked like my right upper arm, which bears a large patch of scar tissue. Even today, when I get hot or too tired, I can't help but fidget my shoulders. I'm sure my body remembers that day. I also remember poor young Willie's shocking asthma. He was allergic to cow's milk and wheat dust. Hardly a good start for a wheat farmer's son. He could barely breathe when the asthma came on. I would lie awake some nights hoping he wouldn't suffocate. Dad bought a couple of goats so Willie could have goat's milk. Will had Mum's positive outlook, but the asthma gave him a bad start. He was always very skinny and quite weak as a kid. Hard to imagine nowadays, as he grew to about 5'10" and his hands are much wider than mine. I was 5 years old when Robin arrived, and I really didn't need another brother to land on our family doorstep and disturb the peace. By the time he was 4, I decided that was the worst age for a boy. Robin had no respect for the rules. He delighted in unrolling the tyres off my micro-model car collection, which obviously upset me no end. Those toys were special to me. I'd save halfpennies and pennies to raise 2 shillings to buy them. Everyone said Robin was like Pa, my dad's father. I was into the movie The Dam Busters and loved to make a dam in my sandpit and blow the banks to the shithouse with a bunger. One day, my cousins Doug and Gerald and I were building a dam. We just about had it finished when Rob turned up. "Piss off," I said. We pushed him aside. I knew he wanted to bugger it up and destroy the dam bank. Next minute, he'd found a metal hearth shovel and donged me on the head, splitting my head open. There was blood everywhere. I was bawling my eyes out, and Pa said, "Serves you right for not letting him play with you." I think I'll learn my grandfather saw something of himself in Robin. I've never thought about having a favourite brother. Willie and I weren't overly close as kids. We both had plenty of mates of our own. I suspect siblings are closer when they're isolated on a farm rather than living in town as we did. Robin was a stubborn little bugger. However, Peter, the next in line, couldn't do anything wrong by me. Maybe it was because we are so much alike. When we catch up these days, his wife Annie always tells him, "That's how you'll look in 10 years. I hate that. I feel as young as he looks. The novelty of having brothers had completely worn off by the time Jeff was born. I was 14. I love him as much as the others, but we all wanted a girl in the family. It suited Mum to live in town rather than on the farm. It was much more convenient. We could walk to school and the shops. A local dairy farmer delivered the milk, and Tom Hogan, our next-door neighbour in Kerrang Road, came around once a week with a pencil and pad and took our grocery order. He could recite every product in his stall. Vegemite? No thanks. Wheaties? Yes please. Vita Wheat? Yes, 2 packets, and so on. He delivered the groceries in his 1948 sandy-coloured FX Holden ute. As you can imagine, life in Quambatook was idyllic for a country boy. I had the fun of being from the land as well as having mates my own age in town, which brought me many adventures. Our house was a stone's throw away from the Avoca River, a peaceful little stream full of plate-sized redfin and yabbies that was perfect for fishing. Not like the Murray River, which is deep and full of dangerous whirlpools. My mates and I found the fish easy to lure, using copper spinners with red tails. A bit of steel wool on brasso kept them shiny. It spoilt me from fishing with worms forever. Close to home, there were so many things a boy could enjoy. Finding mushrooms for the table, shooting and digging out rabbits and foxes, swimming in the river. A game of hide-and-seek took in the whole town with a game called black trackers. One kid would go ahead with a lump of limestone and draw arrows on the footpath in the direction he was headed. But you could lead the hunters astray by pointing them to a dead end and backtracking. The biggest adventure in Quamby, and the most daring, was to climb the 120-foot high silo. This was entirely a no-no, but of course, That was half the reason for doing it. Only one person was officially allowed to climb the wheat silo, and that was the man working for the wheat board. On the rare occasions, this man mistakenly left the door open. Our neighbours, the Pepperell kids, and I took advantage of it. We had it all planned. We'd always have a bag of paper aeroplanes ready to throw off the top. There were about 6 skinny little ladders with a platform at the end of each one. No safety cages. Everything was covered with a centimetre of fine wheat dust. Willie wanted to come too, but at least I was responsible enough to make him stay on the ground. Being an asthmatic, the wheat dust would have nearly killed him. Well, for a kid who was brought up on flat ground, the view from the silo was breathtaking. I could see everyone's backyard at once. What a small town. I could also see the wheat silo up the railway line at Canny, 14 kilometres away. The aeroplanes worked well too. The Pepperell boys were always a bit more daring than me. They crawled right to the edge. Remember, there were no safety rails, and stuck their heads over and spat on whinging little Willie on the ground. My main worry was that Dad would see me from home. He might as well have seen me, because the next time Willie and I had a fight, Willie cried and told Dad and Mum, "Yeah, well, John climbed the wheat silo yesterday." We both got 6 of the best of Dad's big hand on our bums, me for climbing the wheat silo and Willie for telling on his big brother. At Christmas time, the organ from the Catholic church was loaded onto the back of a truck, and Miss Graham, the organist, pumped out Christmas carols. Mum and Dad and anyone else who could sing piled onto the truck and sang carols all around town. We'd stop in front of any house where the people came out. But Christmas in the Mallee as a kid was really all about Lake Merrin, near Kerrang. My uncle had a speedboat for water skiing, something I never really enjoyed. It always seemed like hard work. It was the farmers' traditional games, such as stook tossing, where a stook of hay is thrown over a high rope with a pitchfork, that I remember. This and the egg and spoon and sack races gave the lake a great atmosphere. Lake Merrin was about half an hour away, and Kangaroo Lake not much further. The summer holidays meant many weekends having picnics on the banks of these lakes. Kangaroo Lake, between Kerrang and Swan Hill, was probably our family's favourite. It seemed to be much bigger and more peaceful. In the 20s or 30s, someone planted weeping willows on the edge of the lake. While many people now deem them as a pest along our rivers, they were perfect for shade and summer picnics. We just loved being together under the willows. Today, it's hard to believe that even during harvest time, we would have Sunday off. They don't close the silos on Sundays now. The weather has become too unpredictable. Rain in the wheat can cost you many thousands of dollars with loss of protein through bleaching. There were other lakes in the district that were left alone for the birds, except on duck opening day. Being such a bird lover now, it's weird that I had a day duck shooting with my Williams cousins. Yes, my mother's sister married a Williams, so it's confusing. My dad wasn't into duck shooting, but my Uncle Ralph was. I have to confess that I didn't hit one duck, but my cousins bagged plenty. The ducks were divided up and eaten and were absolutely delicious. Duck opening day was unbelievable. It was called Duck Opening Day because duck shooting in Victoria was allowed for a short period only. I don't believe it was to save the ducks for conservation reasons, but to make sure they weren't shot out for the next duck season. I guess this all seemed reasonable in the early days when the sky was almost blacked out by bird life in these areas. But that didn't mean you just pointed the gun, shot into the air and hit one. It still required skill to follow an individual duck that was flying at high speed and to bring it down. The really keen shooters had bird dogs, such as Irish setters and retrievers, to swim out and grab the duck. This often caused arguments over whose duck it was. Bloody hell, how could you tell? Well, a flock came through at sunup. The guns went off all around the lake. The shooters were about 20 metres apart. Pellets dropped all around you. What annoyed me that day was that the guns went off when swans and shags flew by. My uncle was annoyed too. Those bloody city slickers would shoot anything, he said. It wasn't as though you could eat those birds. Years later, it would give me a couple of lines from my song Mallee Boy. So I had the best of both worlds, I reckon. On the weekends, I could spend time with my mates, or just be with my dad as he went out doing all the things he had to do on the blocks of land outside town. For us boys, my brothers and my cousins, it was quite normal to ride with the dogs in the back of the old army ute, or stand next to Dad as he went around and round the paddock with the plough, or sit on top of a load of wheat all the way to the wheat silo at harvest time. I can still see the mallee trees flickering through the sun in my eyes as I lay in the back of Dad's old Chevy ute down the Mallee lane, or standing with the kelpies enjoying the wind in our faces, thumping the cabin when we spotted a fox. There was always a .22 rifle in the cabin. The only time I fell out of the ute was when it was stationary. Harvest time was very special. In the early days, we would ride on the top of bags of wheat or wool bales in the back of the old maple leaf truck. Then came the time we could sit on the bulk wheat. With our legs well and truly planted in the grain, it couldn't have been safer heading to the silo on the truck. Nowadays, that would be frowned upon and illegal. So I feel lucky to have been a kid before all the safety issues were introduced. We taught ourselves to be careful through experience. Such was my world in Quambatook, and I am forever grateful for it. Dear little Quambatook, my little town hasn't disappeared yet. Quambatook, take a look, I'll never forget. Warm in the shade of a peppercorn tree, dear little Quambatook, hometown to me. It's as flat as a tack in the old Mallee bush. Billy carts were useless, you needed a push. But we had a river, you could ride on a drum, dive off the bridge, get a leech on your bum. Oh, God, it's so small, but it was my world. Never enough daylight to play, in a town where imagination ran wild. Why did we all move away?